Welcome to my third presentation, this series. I will be talking about the value of processed animal protein ingredients to aquaculture feed production. I would like to present, first of all, an historical perspective and an industrial overview on the production, on the history and production of rendered animal protein ingredients, fat ingredient. Every year, the US agricultural industry, but also the animal industry around the world, is producing millions of animals. These animals are slaughtered for meat and other product, and a large part of these animal is not consumed. About 49% of the weight of a cattle, beef cattle, is not consumed for at least for human food consumption. About 44% of the mass of hogs is not consumed, at least in North America, with this saying called eating eye off the hog, and I'll explain what it means in a few minutes. Chickens are slaughtered, and we use quite a bit of it, but still about 37% is not used as human food and goes to other use. Same thing for turkey. This slaughtering of animals and this non-use of part of the animal for for food results in the productions of billions of kilograms of animal byproducts, meat byproducts and poultry byproducts, etc. Now, many of you are listening from Asia or from elsewhere around the world, where actually animals, more larger proportion of animals, of the animal that you slaughter is consumed. I spent quite a bit of time in Europe, and in Europe you always find the delicatessen counter, the charcuterie, in the French culture or German culture, where actually many of the parts of the hog, from the head, the snout, the ear, right, the intestine, the feet, etc., the liver, is consumed, right, or processed in process form, in form of sausage, pate, and all these different things. In European culture, they have this saying, in France, they have this saying, in pigs, everything is good, or everything is good in a pig. Now, interestingly, over the span of about 1 century, all these animal parts that were extremely valuable for producing very highly valued food products kind of became looked as being unappetizing and not fit for human consumptions. And yet you go around the world and you find what I call gastronomical treasures, from the gizzard salad in the south of France to the head cheese to chicken feet dim sum to lamb offal stew in Morocco, right, to tribes in different countries. And I mentioned the delicatessen in Germany. All these products are actually produced with animal parts that in North America and other places in the world now are not valued, highly valued, and therefore needs to be processed in a different way. We literally got used to eating eye off the hog, meaning that a customer, especially in America, has actually been wanting just to use lean meat or something like this and didn't want to, right? Didn't want to eat the lower part, the feet, the organs, and stuff like that. So over the years, over the very quite recent past, like I mentioned, these gastronomical treasure kind of became unusable or not valuable to the population, and we had to deal with them. A contributing factor to this was the fact that the meat packing, the animal slaughtering, and meat processing facilities became highly centralized. Ever watch a cowboy movie, right? There's always a cattle drive. Well, the cattle drive, it was a real thing. The cattle will pasture in the open plains in the western, and then they will be brought over hundreds of kilometers, miles, to Chicago, another place like this, would then be slaughtered and then put on rail cart and brought to the city on the East Coast, Boston, New York, Washington, and the like. So actually, the carcass travels very well, but the organs would rapidly, right, spoil the blood, the liver, the intestine. So that would create piles and piles of these things, and there's not big areas of population around this to consume those rapidly. So therefore, right, start creating an environmental problem. The solution to this environmental problem and this like overabundance of animal byproduct is rendering. So rendering was introduced. It's an age-old practice. You render animal byproducts to extract the fat, for example, from pigs, from any animals. Even First Nations, right, indigenous people in U.S. and Canada practice this to render the fat of animal they kill in order to have cooking fats and dry the meat and stabilize the meat. So it's an age-old practice. But rendering became an industry to deal with the very abundant amount of byproducts coming from the slaughterhouse. You know, this either coming from a slaughterhouse or meat processing facilities or even real tailor shop at the end when they cannot sell the meat or when they trim the cut and they don't sell the bones, the trims and etc. is sent to rendering for non-human food use. Now we like to think about a value chain for animal product. Of course, anything that can be consumed indirectly or indirectly or by humans is the highest value. You don't value a steak versus another product. So that's the highest value product. Then there's the pharmaceutical and fine chemistry. If you can extract gelatin or heparin or something like this from pig intestines or liver or something like this, well, that has very high value. Then the third in the order is generally considered pet food because people will buy very expensive food for their cats and dog. They'll be spending literally a fortune, several dollars a kilogram, right, for pet food. So if you can find a use in pet food, generally it's the highest value. Then the fourth is used in regular animal feed. And I would locate aquaculture feed somewhere between pet food and regular land or livestock feed. And then you got industrial use, they use for lubricant, for example, or something like this. They use as fertilizer. You can use the bone meal, the meat and bone meal. The various product has fertilizer. It's rich in phosphorus. It's rich in nitrogen. Sometimes it's rich in a lot of micro elements that the plant require. And then finding the lowest value is a fuel value. We basically burn the fat. They burn the organic matter to recover the energy to fire up a boiler, for example, in the rendering plant. That's not a very kind of highly economical use of the ingredients, but it is a way to use the ingredient. So you have to think about that value chain. So that's what happened during the animal slaughter and the rendering process is you try to capture as much value as possible from the product. Now the raw material that are handled by the rendering industry and are produced by the animal agricultural industry are extremely very varied, very diverse. You of course got the guts, right? The intestine, the liver, things like that. So anything that is not going to have a very high market values or it's difficult to handle. So you could find a market value, but it's a little bit difficult to preserve. You'll have feathers. You'll have the hair of hogs, for example. You'll have hooves and horns and things like that, which can be quite significant. You'll have beaks and feet and things like that, the nails and thing. You'll have the cutting byproducts, the bones, right? The fat cut out when you cut out the meat, etc. So actually, it's a wide variety of raw material that needs to be processed. Rendering, as a general kind of message, is converting these byproducts into something that is stable. In general, something that is dry, a dry powder in the meal, right? A liquid, generally high fat, right? The fat, you evaporate the water. So you basically turn very wet, very high volume material that decompose very rapidly, that will spoil, into highly stable product of lower volume that can keep, that don't go bad right away. It takes several weeks, several months before, right, it's no longer fit for consumption, and very easy to store, handle, ship, and etc. and incorporate in feeds, in pellets, and the like. Now, how these raw material transform into these valuable products? Well, the rendering industry does that. In US and Canada, there's over 170 facilities in the US and 10 in Canada. It's a $10 billion dollar industry. It processed 27.5 million metric tons, so 62 billion pounds of raw material each year, about 77 million kilograms of raw material each day is processed by these 180 facilities in North America. These products are shipped all over the world. There's like an example of a port where a renderers has a big yard of silos and stuff and things in order to unload the material for loading onto ships. Now, I mentioned there's a wide diversity of material. You can have offals, meaning the intestines, the guts of the animal, bones and fat, the blood. You can have animal dead on arrival, transits on farm, mortality, albeit now it's separated. You can have restaurant grease. When you go to fast food restaurant, the grease right gets unsuitable for frying the food anymore. Well, the rendering industry recovers that grease and transform it into rendered fat. You got feathers and hog hair and hoofs and horn, right, and things like that. And you got the recalled meat, or basically the past due meat. If a grocery store, for example, packs up some meat in these styrofoam trays or the like, and they pass due date, they're not purchased, and they need to be handled, and often they're shipped to the rendering plant. This. Now I mentioned the raw material includes a wide variety of material. These materials contain 60% water, about 20% proteins and minerals, and about 20% fat. It really depends on the raw material. If you have hair, feathers, horn, things like that, it's over 90% protein, just a little bit of moisture and other things, and a little bit of minerals in there. So it really depends, but on average, about 60% water. Highly susceptible to spoilage, to bacterial degradation, etc. Highly perishable. So you actually need to transform these products as soon as possible, or it becomes, it starts to decay, start to stink, and it can also be a source of pathogen. There may be some salmonella, E. coli, and the like, and that will actually could contaminate humans, animals, and the environment. So the rendering industry offers a safe and integrated system to deal with these raw material, right, in a very straightforward fashion, and transform those into valuable product, thereby limiting environmental impact that could be associated with these byproducts, right? Controlling disease by multiplication of pathogens and stuff like that. So actually, it's an extremely valuable industry. Now, not all byproducts are processed or sold, at least in finished product. In US and Canada, rules were imposed where specific raw materials, which is is defined as the skull, the ganglia, the eyes, the spinal cord, the distal idiom, the dorsal root ganglia, right? Actually, of animals more than 30 months, needs to be processed separately. And actually, you cannot, right? So since 2007, right, you cannot feed specific, in Canada at least, you cannot feed specific raw, specific risk material to any animals, including pets, domestic animal. And the US also has similar rule. So the rendering industry, in response to the mad cow disease crisis, the governments impose very strict rule to minimize the potential, right, for disease transmission and stuff like that. Now, here are a few of the finished product. That's from a poultry processing rendering plant processing poultry byproducts, right? Poultry guts and beaks and feet and feathers and the like. You got feather meal, you got poultry fat, you got poultry meal, you got different kinds of poultry meal, different grades of poultry meal, often defined by the protein content, the ash content, and the fat content of that final product. How it works, the raw material converted into these nice, dry, ground up products, right? And the fat, well, it starts, right, with a cooker. So the raw material is cooked. It is pressed to separate the liquids, the water and the fat. The water and the fat are separated further by centrifugations, right? And the water is evaporated. The press cake is actually the meal, the protein, and the minerals that are dry, ground, and basically handled. Now, around the rendering plant, also there's right wastewater treatment. There's actually a number of buffer zones and stuff like that in order to deal with potential right environmental runoff and contamination of the environment and etc. So the raw material is reduced into particle size that are suitable for the cooker. It's heat processed in that cooker. Depending on the raw material and the equipment that they have, the time, the duration, and the temperature will be different. It can be a few minutes, 20 minutes, could be 40 minutes or something like this, could be relatively low temperature versus a relatively high temperature. The raw material that are cooked, right, become soft. The press, basically the liquids are separated, the fat is separated from the water, the protein and the minerals, right, from the press cakes are basically dried, ground, and loaded for storage. This. Cooking is really, rendering is really cooking and drying. It can either be in continuous flow, your equipment, you get raw material that flows continuously within the cooker, or it may just be a batch of things. So for example, in feather meal, it would be very often a question of batch of feathers is loaded in a steam hydrolyzer, right? And the temperatures rise, and then after that, at the end of the process, the hydrolyzer is unloaded. In many cases, for the production of meat and bone meal, stuff like that, it will be more of a continuous process. Everything is generally cooked with steam. There's no direct flames, stuff like that. We're talking 115 to 145 degrees for 40 to 90 minutes. The rendering industry, because of these high temperature in this process, offer a very highly sanitary and ecological way of dispose of this raw material, right, that would spoil very easily. And those high temperature for these period of time kill basically every conventional disease causing organism, whether it's bacteria, virus, and etc. You can see before rendering, right? So you have the raw material, you test the raw material for the presence of pathogens, pathogenic bacteria. A large proportion of the product contain these pathogenic things, Clostridium, Listeria, right? Campylobacter, Salmonella, highly abundant in these raw material. Coming out from the cooker, right, and a dryer, basically these things are sterile. They're actually zero detectable level of these pathogens. So that's an extremely effective way of dealing with this kind of material that spoil easily and can contain significant amount of pathogenic bacteria. Now, you have a wide variety of raw material that is produced through rendering, and you got right raw materials that are processed, and you got a wide variety of raw material, or finished product that comes out from this. AFCO US has over 125 defined animal byproduct of all kinds of all shapes, species, and different types. So basically, the sky is the limit. You can decline or declinate all these products into wide variety. You got meat meal, which is high protein animal proteins. You got meat and bone meal, often presented as function of species, porcine versus ruminant or beef. You got blood meal, often presented or defined by the drying method that was used. So defined by the species, whether it's porcine, bovine, or avian blood, and then the type of drying technique that it was used. You got poultry byproduct meal, a wide variety of product. Poultry meal, higher protein product, depends on the name. And then feather meal, which can come from poultry or turkey or duck, right? Can be mixed with hog hair and the like. A wide variety of product. In terms of fat, we got tallow, inedible tallow, comes from rendering. You can have edible tallow, it can go to the basically baking industry. So it's processed using more fresher material and more sanitary matter. But inedible tallow is a hard fat. You got yellow grease, which is often contains recycled restaurant grease. You got other grease, things that comes out from traps in restaurants and fryers and the like. You got the edible tallow, like I mentioned. You got lard, which is a slightly softer fat. So tallow is coming more from ruminant. Lard is coming from pork, from pig, but the difference can be diminished. It's more a question of physical characteristics. And you got poultry fat. You got a wide variety of different kind of fat molecule. The amount of fat produced, right? So mostly it's inedible tallow, the fat that you press when you process raw material from packing house or slaughterhouse. So we're talking about a 1.5 million metric ton of inedible tallow. So very significant. So there's more inedible tallow produced per year in the US than there is fish oil produced around the world, for example. AFCO has a nice series of definitions, very nice documents or your reference document you can download, you can access this documentation, and it basically gives you a definition for each of the product. So meat and bone meal will be the rendered product of mammal tissue, including bone, but exclusive of blood, hair, horn, hide, right? Hide trimmings, manure, stomach, and rumen content, except in the amount that is basically uninevitable through maximum practice. Poultry byproduct meal contains the ground, rendered clean part of the carcass of slaughtered poultry, such as the neck, the feet, undeveloped egg, intestine. There's no feathers in there, right? Except for a small amount that will end up contaminating, etc. You can read these definitions on the AFCO in the AFCO documents, and they're really quite informative. But there's such a wide variety of product that there's a little difference between each product. Now, the U.S. as a large animal agricultural industry, does not consume a whole lot part of the animals, right? About 45-50% of the animals not consumed for human food. So that's basically half the animals that are slaughtered are going towards rendering. And the US is a big exporter, big consumer of rendered animal product, and is also a big exporter of rendered animal proteins. Asia is the main market for these proteins, and Mexico for North America, so Mexico and Canada. So we got, right, in this case, in 2019, Indonesia was the main market. China was less important because of trade restrictions, but it can become a very important market under certain circumstances. Mexico is always a very stable partner of the US. Vietnam is playing actually a very important role in consuming these products. Canada always consume about 5% of US. Canada produce also these products. There's quite a bit of trade between the two countries and all things. Countries like Chile import a fair amount. We'll see why. The Philippines, Thailand, Ecuador, and Malaysia. Now you can see, right, little trend there, right? Countries in Southeast Asia or Asia where actually quite a bit of animal production is occurring, poultry, swine in some case, right? And also aquaculture production. Now, global meat production has increased tremendously over the past 5 centuries. You can see tremendous growth in meat production, and most of the growth has occurred in Asia. China, Vietnam, Indonesia, right? Even the Philippines and these places actually saw great expansion of the animal agricultural industry. That requires feed ingredients to feed these animals. In turn, it may lead to the production of also of animal byproducts, but the rendering industry is not so developed in Asia, or at least it's starting, it's a little bit in its infancy, and a lot more, a larger proportion of the animals consumed in Asian countries, right? So the rendering industry plays a significantly less important role in Asia. So Asia has been mainly a consumer of rendered animal product. Now, I'd like to talk to you a bit about the value of aquaculture, of rendered animal protein in aquaculture feed formulation. And I've been working on this topic since 1994. I started really, did my first trial. So over 20, 26, 27 years ago was the first time I worked on rendered animal protein, and I worked with them all ever since. Aquaculture production is represent a significant volume of feed today in the world. We're talking probably around 40 million metric ton of feed produced. And I find this estimates to be a little bit conservative. This is a global survey by Alltech and really highly credible. I think it's still right. It's probably still another 5 or 6 or even close to 10 million metric ton maybe missing in there from my in my opinion. Maybe related to farm made feed or things like that, or kind of supplemental feed and the like. Aquaculture feed production is actually a significant business. It's a lot smaller than chicken feed production and swine feed production, but it's getting actually closer to other animal feed production. Asia, the Asia Pacific region, is the main region where these feeds are produced, right? With Latin America coming second, Europe and North America after that. So Asia is by far the largest market, right, for aquaculture feed production. But in the Americas, there's still significant production of aquaculture feed. Place like Chile, where a very important salmon feed industry is present, is a significant area of feed production, of high value feed production. And I just pulled out some, there are actually simulations that we simulated with my team at Aqua, some salmon feed formulation for Chile, based kind of credible formulations or possible formulation. And you can see soy protein concentrate is used, fish meal is used. But look at this: blood cell meal, feather meal, poultry byproduct meal, meat and bone meal are actually used at significant level in feed to feed salmon. Fish meal will, for in the finisher phase, will be between 5 to 10% of the diet. Plant protein ingredients will, right, 20, 30, 40% the weight of the, or plant ingredients, I would say, including the grains and stuff, will be what, 20, 30%, 40% of the mass of feed. And the balance is rendered animal protein. So they actually play a very important role in the formulation of aquaculture feed in places like Chile. Well, Chile is a major importer of land animal proteins. It, for example, it imported over 100,000 tons of feather meal, 60,000 tons of poultry byproduct meal, 5,000 tons of blood meal. I got some information back from 2009. Just one company was importing, right, 11, 12 years ago, 20,000 tons, 5,000 tons of poultry byproduct meal, and we're not using blood meal at the time. So actually, feed manufacturer in Chile producing high quality salmon feed, very high value feed, very highly performing species, are actually relying heavily on, right, the import of animal byproduct. These are from 2009. It's a low value, so maybe things. Well, actually, these are real import of protein meal by Chile in 2019. It exported 47, it imported 47,000 tons of animal proteins from the US. It imported 52,000 metric ton from the Mercosur, so meaning Brazil, Argentina, so basically its neighbors, and 53,000 tons from the European Union for 150 things. So actually the numbers from 2009 are not so different, right, from the numbers in 2019. Rendered animal protein are still playing a very important role in the production of feed in Chile. And Chile has a little bit of animal production, a little bit of poultry, a little bit of swine, a little bit of dairy. But right, the aquaculture feed industry is the major consumer of these products. So you can be sure that 147,000 tons of product is going mostly in aquaculture feed production. Now, Chile is an example. I wanted to use Chile as an example of a country producing high quality feed for a high value species. But rendered animal proteins are actually used in a variety of feeds for a variety of species. In this case, right, I just made up a tilapia feed formulation, a typical tilapia feed formulation in Southeast Asia. I work a lot in Southeast Asia, run a lot of workshops and work with many different companies. And basically an aquaculture feed in Southeast Asia looks like that. 40% grains and tuber, meaning cassava and milling byproduct, rice bran, right? Wheat bran pellets and wheat brands and all these things. You got oil seeds, soybean meal, canola, cottonseed meals and the like, right? Sunflowers sometime, about 35%. But look at that. The rendered animal proteins represent about 12% of the weight of a tilapia feed. And omnivorous fish species for feed formulate to 32% protein, 6, 7, 8% fat maximum, right? Still about 12% rendered high quality rendered animal proteins are used in these feeds, so very significant volume. Imagine the global production for tilapia is over 5 million metric ton, if not more today. That's why 12%. So actually, right, we're talking hundreds of thousands of tons of rendered animal byproducts that are going towards in the production of tilapia feed in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. In China, in gibel carp, the crucian carp or gibel carp, right, this carnivorous kind of carp species, formulated to feed formulated 36% protein, also are formulated to contain anywhere between probably 7 or 8% animal protein up to 20%, probably on average 12 to 15% of these protein sources are used in feeds for that species. So imagine in feeds for largemouth bass and mandarin fish and all the highly carnivorous fish species, I think, right, the level can be significantly lower, right? And the rendered animal proteins allows the feed manufacturer to manage to limit the amount of fish meal that they're using in the feed. And fish meal is extremely expensive. Let's talk about price then. Well, rendered animal proteins are commodities. They're same as agricultural commodities, so they actually price fluctuate. Their price fluctuate as function of price of soy and price of petroleum and all these different things. It's all linked together, and you'll have a wide variety of products that sells at different price. Blood meal, because it's more than 80% protein in general, will sell at fairly high price. We see here over the past 2 decades, the past decades and something, the price varied between $800 to $1,600 for ruminant or porcine blood meal, poultry byproduct meal, to a high quality pet food grade, high protein, no ash product will vary between $600 to basically $850 or even more, right? Depending on the time. Lower quality poultry byproduct meal at 57%, this feed grade will basically be discounted by close to $200 compared to that high quality poultry byproduct meal. And you can see the meat and bone meal, the porcine, the ruminant, right? All this significantly lower price. And the feta meal is in between. It's very high protein, but there's some issues sometimes of quality, some issue of amino acid profile and digestibility. So the price is not, the ingredient's not always so valued by the market. So you can see that actually things like meat and bone meal, notably ruminant meat and bone meal, actually represent, in general, very good purchase on a protein basis. When you look at it, right, they represent an excellent, right, purchase of this. Now, these are priced from the source, production where they're produced in the US, but these products, if they're consumed in Southeast Asia or China, something, they need to be shipped. So you actually have to factor in the cost of transportation to determine the real, right, economical value of these ingredients. Every countries will have different market dynamic, different local ingredients that will compete versus the protein source that you import, different taxations, right? Levy and tax and custom fees and insurance and all these different things, different shipping costs, different, right? Transporting costs and etc. So actually you have to do it. With Aqua, my company, we actually developed a platform called Aqua Feed, where we actually populated, right? We developed database for 14 major aquaculture producing countries, and we're adding several more countries, right, on a regular basis. Some countries on a regular basis. So we constructed database in this case for 14 countries for basically pretty much all the ingredients that can commonly use in aquaculture feed formulation in these countries, listed the series of nutritional parameters, but also attributes. Attributes meaning, for example, marine protein, vegetable protein, land animal protein, organic, non-GMO, certified, etc., etc. So we're covering several countries in Latin America, covering several countries, of course, in Asia, and a few countries in Asia and the Middle East. As part of the Aqua platform, we've developed what we call an economical valuation tool, which is a tool that analyzes data on ingredient cost, basically the price of the ingredient, and basically calculate a fair market price for these ingredients on the basis of their nutritional composition. It's based on early work done by Prof. Norm St. Pierre from the Ohio State University, but we've improved the statistical model. And what we added to the models is calculating fair economical value of feed ingredients on the basis of nutrient content of these ingredients, digestible nutrient content of these ingredients, but also a series of attributes. So in terms of attributes, we have marine protein not contributing to fish in, fish out ratio, that's important for certification bodies, vegetable protein, terrestrial animal protein, non-GMO, allowed Proterra, U.S. Sustainable Soy Assurance Program, FDA grass, whatever. We had a series of things. And then a series of nutritional parameters, basically digestible protein, digestible amino acids, fatty acid composition, mineral, right, phosphorus, and a series of other parameters like this: starch content, lipids, protein. The tool calculates a fair market price. So it takes the current market price of all the ingredients and relate them to one another and basically computes a fair market price on the basis of nutrient composition and the attributes of these ingredients. You can see here, you got blood meal, different blood meal, meat and bone meal, poultry byproduct meal, and after that we have cassava and stuff like that. The first column is the market price, and the second column is the model evaluated value. And then the second last column or last column gives you the price difference, right, between the market price and the estimated market price or fair market value. And you can see for some ingredients it's in red, so meaning it's not such a good deal. So the market price is higher than the fair market value. When the value is in green, it's higher. The value, the nutritional value, right? So is higher than the market price. Notice. We plot those, and the green dots represent good deal, and the red dot represent not so good deal. And we have a matrix here, and I'll own in on the matrix here. So in this specific case, it estimated the cost of digestible protein, so the cost per unit per ton of digestible protein, the cost per ton of lipids, the cost per ton of starch, per tons of digestible methionine, per tons of digestible phosphorus, and per ton of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA. But it adds also a premium or a penalty on ingredients on the basis of attributes. And in a specific example that I ran, actually we have marine protein having a high premium. So just because the protein source is of marine origin, it basically gets a bonus. If it's a marine protein that doesn't contribute to fish in fish out ratio, let's say a byproduct from a canning plant, right? It's fish meal, but it doesn't count as fish meal when you compute your fish in fish out ratio for different certification program like BAP and ASC, right? It's even higher premium. Then there's a penalty for vegetable protein. Vegetable protein get discount a little bit per unit of weight. And land animal protein as general get discount quite significantly per ton, especially compared to marine proteins. And so actually, this tells you that the land animal proteins get a penalty on the market and often represent the best deal that you can purchase. If you look at this here, the different meat and bone meal, some of the blood meal represent very, very good deal. Blood meal in this case represented a tremendous deal. It's worth $300 more than what it's being sold at. That meat and bone meal is worth $55 more than what is it sold at. That meat and bone meal, that second meat and bone meal, the higher protein is $69 more than this, right? The poultry meal is actually quite well valued, and actually in this case you're overpaying a little bit for that poultry meal. So that tool allows you to meaningfully calculate the nutritional value, the fair market value for aquaculture ingredient. And in a nutshell, basically marine protein gets a big bonus. Basically, because it's marine protein, it gets a head start on the price. Land animal protein, except poultry byproduct meal, often get penalties, so therefore they're the great deal for the buyers. And plant protein, it really depends, but kind of the reference basis. So actually, they're generally valued quite well by the market. Now, this tool that we've developed is a tool in development. We're working on improving the statistical model, improving the database of ingredients, the nutrients that we're covering, all the computation, etc. So very much a work in progress, but I see a lot of promise to be able to, in each of the market, right, identify what are the good deals, what are the ingredients you should be purchasing or not. In a little bit more wholesome manner than you would do when you do price shadowing with feed formulation. With feed formulation, you cannot quantify the attributes. You can look at one ingredient at a time or groups of ingredients, one versus another. Whereas this allows you to compare all the ingredients at once and identify trends or factors that are valued more highly by the market, and then identify better deals nowadays. Now let's talk about the rendered animal proteins from a nutritional value per se, not just in the use of feed, but let's just kind of characterize them, right? And when I got started, I mentioned 1994, rendered animal protein were quite widely used in poultry and swine feed, but aquaculture feed manufacturer, still starting quite early in aquaculture feed production, but still it was very well established, were quite refractory, quite not interested in using these products. And the reason why, so I was approached by the rendering industry at that time. A rendering company wanted to sell their product to aquaculture feed manufacturer, and they're saying, well, we're knocking on their door and they're not interested in our product, and we don't understand because swine and poultry feed producers are really interested in our product. And I started looking into it and talking to people in the industry. And at that time, it's hard to believe, but fish meal was around $500 a ton. Fair average quality fish meal was about $500 per ton. So when I was talking to feed manufacturers, I said, well, I could be using fish meal that costs $500 or use feather meals that's $400. So why take the risk? So they were not interested in the risk. The other aspect is that the values that were reported in the literature in terms of digestibility and nutritive value were very low. For example, in the NRC 1993, not that long ago, from my perspective, feather meal was listed as 58% digestible, poultry byproduct meal was listed at 68% digestible. Now I laugh today because these values actually came from my lab at University of Guelph. My predecessor, Young Cho, and his mentor, Stanley Slinger, had carried out this work in the 1970s. And these values were carried over in the 1990s and early 2000, right? Because they're the only values available. Any digestibility, credible digestibility values were there. But over the span of 20, 30 years, the rendering industry tremendously evolved. The, the manufacturing practice, the equipment, all this became better and better. So actually, these values were actually quite outdated. So I was approached by the rendering industry, first by renderers, and then after that, I was sponsored by the Canadian Renderer, then Canadian Renderers Association, and after that, by the Fats and Protein Research Foundation. And we carried out digestibility trial using the Guelph system, which was been used by my former boss, Young Cho, to examine the digestibility of the same product in the 1970s. Now, Young Cho and his mentor Stanley Singer had been carrying out a lot of work and actually right on this, and they had measured the digestible protein, digestibility of energy, a wide variety of practical feed ingredients, including animal proteins, including blood meal, right, and other things like that. So when I carried out my work in the 1990s, I had a good reference basis because I could refer back to the values that were published by Young Cho using the same equipment, the same methodology, basically the exact same approach. And when I compare my results with his results, I found very significant improvement. I was able to show significant improvement in the digestibility of feather meal, poultry byproduct meal, and meat and bone meal and all this. In this case, right, Young Cho had reported the digestibility of feather meal to be 58%, digestibility of protein of feather meal to be 58%. I measure over 80% digestibility of these products. I'm able to say that there's been an improvement in digestibility because we use the same equipment, the same technique, right? The same research so we can actually compare apples to apples. If we look at other data and literature from Segura, from Pfeiffer in Germany, Segura, right, in Washington State, you can see the values are closer to mine, but you don't know because they use different equipment, slightly different practice, and etc. So it's very difficult, and you may be comparing apples and oranges. We carried out work on blood meal and actually identified that the drying technique used in the production of blood meal had tremendous impact on the digestibility of these ingredients, right? Spray dried blood meal is almost completely digestible to animal. It's produced a very gentle drying process, and actually, right, it may preserve the nutritional quality. Ring drying maintains high digestibility, but still significantly lower than spray dry. Steam tube dry, much lower digestibility, and then rotoplate drying, lower digestibility. So you can see the drying equipment has tremendous impact on apparent digestibility, and it's a question of heat damage to the protein. Now, a skilled operator can operate the equipment in a good way, in a gentle way, and produce a high quality product. You cannot just paint things with a broad brush and say, well, this type of blood meal is less good than this type of blood meal. There's also an art in producing these ingredients. So sometimes the ingredients can be produced with equipment that has limitation, but can be well produced using these equipment and maintain high digestibility. So that's why quality control is essential, but really quite challenging. Feather meal is an interesting ingredient. We measure high digestibility in my trials that I carried out with these feather meals between 81 to 87%. We were lucky to have feather meals from different origin, coming from different types of equipment, different processing conditions, temperature and pressure and durations, and different types of dryers to dry. And we found, difference in digestibility between the different feather meals, but we were not able to very well ascertain difference in nutritional value between feather meals of different digestibility. I carried out a series of trials in the 1990s, right? And this is a portion of the work that we did. We did, in this case, in a series of trials, 7 feather meal, 9 meat and bone meal. We had 2 or 3 poultry byproduct meal. We did 7, 8, or 9 blood meals. Anyway, we measured the digestibility of a lot of different batch of rendered animal proteins. The conclusion was that these products were actually quite highly digestible. Above 75, definitely, right? Above 75, probably 80, 85% digestible to rainbow trout and other aquaculture species. So the old values that were present in the NRC coming from old work from my lab actually were no longer reliable, and these values were more widely adopted and make the use of rendered animal protein more interesting because now they were more, right, more digestible, and the price of fish meal and price of fish oil and other product like this went up. So actually became very important strategic ingredients to meet the nutrient requirements of animals in a cost-effective fashion. Now, interestingly, about the same time that I was doing this work, at the same time I was doing this work, my friend Dr. Hadel El Moaf, he was working for Sugarcane Ag Research. Now he's working for Cargill EWAS, was actually setting up a lab on aquaculture nutrition and basically responsible for feed formulation and R&D for aquaculture feeds at Sugarcane, and was looking for a quality control technique to look at the quality of different ingredients. And he came across the work of Nick Dimes and Ard, which is a group of researchers in California, who had been developing a pH stat assay for assessing the digestibility of protein, or the degree of degradability of protein. So Adele asked me sample from our trial, from the rendered animal proteins I was testing in my trials, and we basically compare notes. So he analyzed those using this technique, and he compared to my results of digestibility, and the results were very much in agreement. We had basically, we plot the results, the degradability, the degree of hydrolysis it was getting with the pH stat method and the ADC of protein, and find high correlation between these two methods. You have to use one slope, right, for the blood meals and the different things, the different kinds of protein. But for the feather meal, the poultry byproduct meal, the meat and bone meal, and the fish meal, actually, everything fell on the same line, and you could differentiate between high digestibility product and lower digestibility product. It was really quite interesting. And that led me to believe, says, well, actually, there's a real chemical basis for difference in digestibility. This is not random. We're not just measuring digestibility and just getting a random number and it's digestible for whatever reason. There's actually a chemical basis, and you can replicate that chemistry. You can investigate that chemistry. You can isolate enzymes, right? You can put them in buffers and all this, and you can actually replicate the biology using chemistry, right, in a test tube and predict the digestibility of feed ingredients. So I found this really interesting, very valuable, but it actually emphasized the fact that the digestibility of these products were actually really quite good and could be predicted on the basis of chemical reaction. I carried out many other trials with rendered animal proteins over the years. One more recently, about 8, 9, 10 years ago, with ingredients from Chile. We also measured, but we measured like slightly lower digestibility. So poultry meal produced in Chile about 79% things, but I would expect it about 85%. Turkey meal was highly digestible. Feather meal, if we're falling in the 69%. Porcine meal, right, with rare things that was right there where we were expecting about 85% and all this. So actually, it told me that there's actually quite a bit of difference in digestibility between products. And the more trial you do, the more you find difference. But how meaningful are these differences? Because in this specific trials, the fish performed extremely well. It was a digestibility trial, but the growth performance were fantastic. The feed efficiency of the fish were fantastic. So we're measuring lower digestibility than what we expected for some product, but still the animal were performing really quite well. So it was a little bit puzzling to me. I'll get to this in a few moments. When we look at rendered animal protein, we have to realize that there's different grades. In fish meal, there's different grades of fish meal, different species and different grades, right? Primes, super primes and stuff. Well, the same thing happens for poultry byproduct meal. You got feed grade product, generally that is lower in protein, higher in ash, and you got basically refined product, often produced through air classification, where you get rid of the ash, you bump up the protein level, right? You greatly reduce the ash level. They're highly suitable for pet food manufacturing, especially cat food, for example. You don't want too much ash in there, but for many other animals, it can be valuable. So you do have different grades of the same ingredient. So you cannot just say poultry byproduct meal is poultry byproduct meal. There is actually different grades of these feed ingredients. And these different grades of feed ingredients show different digestibility. In this specific example, work by Chen and Ardi, they found that feed grade poultry byproduct meal was slightly less digestible than refined grade poultry byproduct meal. And the prime, the average product, was in between the two. They also measure apparent digestibility of essential amino acids and found high digestibility of these amino acids in the different things. Difference between quality of product, the difference are not always all that dramatic, but they need to be taken into account. This kind of information is extremely meaningful and extremely valuable when formulating cost-effective feeds, because we want to formulate on a digestible basis, but we often lack information. So this kind of studies is actually very important. And I find there's not enough of those kind of studies in the literature. Now, beside carrying out digestibility trials, I also carried out a number of feeding trials using these ingredients. Starting in 1994, 1995, up to 2000, I carried out a series of trials looking at the value of feather meal, meat and bone meal, poultry byproduct meal, blood meal, different levels and combinations in typical diet. Now, at that time, diets contained more fish meal. So my reference diet would contain 30, 35, 40, 45% fish meal. But we used the rendered animal proteins to replace that high fish meal and reduce them to lower level, the 30s and 20% range. You can see in the study, I was using the same blood, meat, and bone meal I was testing for digestibility. So the 7 and 8 and 9 refers to the meat and bone meal that we use in the digestibility trial. We use feeds with 12, 24% of the 3 meat and bone meal in successions. We also supplement the diet with synthetic amino acids. To make a long story short, actually, relatively high fish meal protein diet, 12 or 24% meat and bone meal works fine. You have absolutely no problem in performance. The fish love the diet. They perform very well. Yeah, you got a slight drop in performance, like we got maybe a gram, 2 grams less weight gain over this, right? A 0.05 difference, 0.1 difference in feed efficiency or FCR. Small difference, but we're using 24% meat and bone meal, right? Stuff that is high in ash, 45, 50% protein in there. And yet the animal did perfectly well with those. We got high growth rate, very good performance. So from that day, I knew I could formulate feed with high levels of animal proteins, no problem. We started using, right, lower and lower fish meal level, reducing fish meal level, using combination of plant protein and fish meal in the basal diet, and then replacing this fish meal and plant proteins with poultry byproduct meal or blood meal and all this. And look at these performance, no difference in performance at all, right? So using blood meal, high quality blood meal at 6 or 12% of the diet was perfectly fine. Even, right, 12% blood meal worked really well. Up to 30% poultry byproduct meal worked extremely well. Look at the digestibility, maintain high digestibility, maintain high feed efficiency, so meaning low FCR, so FCR below 1 for these fish species growing from 17 grams to 200 grams, right? So actually, great confidence in product like poultry byproduct meal and blood meal and meat and bone meal to sustain high growth performance. I pushed the envelope a little bit more. It says, well, if we can use 20 or 30% poultry byproduct meal and 12 to 24% meat and bone meal. Why not combine them together and push the envelope and reduce fish meal further? So that's what we did in these trials. We combined feather meal and meat and bone meal, feather meal and poultry byproduct meal and meat and bone meal, replacing fish meal, and some case, right, replacing soybean meal, all this. Look at the results. Yeah, we had a slight drop in performance sometime with feather meal and meat and bone meal, right? But right, the fish finish at 248, 40 things, so 20 or 30 grams difference, slightly maybe a point 0.1 per point 0.1 decrease in feed efficiency or FCR, right? But these feed contain 17% feather meal and 25% meat and bone meal, right? How many people were using high levels of these ingredients at that time in feed containing only 20% fish meal, right? So this gave me great confidence as, right, if my feed formulation program calls for 20% meat and bone meal or a combination of this or 25% combination of animal proteins, I have pretty high confidence that the fish can do well. Look at the TGC, the thermal unit growth coefficient growth. These were among the best growth rate that we ever saw in our lab in the 1990s. So we're basically extremely pleased. The fish were performing extremely well, very good feed efficiency. So imagine fish growing from 35 gram to 278 gram, right, with a feed efficiency of 1.12, or basically an FCR zero point 0.9 or something like this. So formulating feed with high level of rendered animal protein ingredients was a reality, right? We could use high level. I continued over the years to use rendered animal protein ingredients in combination with other proteins. So a more recent trial that we carried out over 20 weeks at our research station where the water temperature is low, so it takes a long time to grow the fish. But we use modern diet that contain between 10 to 20% fish meal today. And then look at that, we're using always 15, 22, 24, 25% poultry byproduct meal, 6 to right, 9, 5 to 9% feather meal, 1 to 4, 6% blood meal, corn gluten meal, soybean meal. And then we're testing sunflower meal, rapeseed meal, right? High protein rapeseed meal, a protein concentrate, an eye oil soy protein concentrate, a flaxseed, or eye oil flaxseed. I put a red square around diet 1, 3, and 4, 1, 3, and 5, because they were the best performing diet, but diet 4 performed really well. You can see in terms of performance, no difference in performance, right? No significant difference, all this. The best FCR, the best feed efficiency at 0.64, 0.63, 0.66 with diet 1, 3, and 4. What are they made of? Well, 15, right, to 24, right? 20% poultry byproduct meal, 6, 7, 5% feather meal, right? 1 or 2% blood meal, and then 20%, right, of a high quality plant protein, corn gluten meal, soybean meal, right? And the rest was wheat flour and fish oil and plant oil. So relatively simple diet, right? That performed very well for these larger animals, right? That we had at our research station. So you can formulate highly effective, practical diet with high level or rendered animal proteins. And look at the growth trajectory. There's no big difference. The only one that was falling off was the diet that contained high level of flaxseed oil, high oil flaxseed, a new product, right? It's not worth it. But you can see that diet 1, 3, and 5, and then the other one are not far behind, right? These things are containing, we go back, right? 22, 9, right? So over 30%, 30 something percent rendered animal protein in them and performing very well. This is work with trout, may not be highly relevant for where you are in the world, but I've done a lot of work in Asia, including work with Professor Wang Yan from Zhejiang University, looking at the potential of using land animal proteins in a diet of marine fish, including the cuneate drum and other species. A very nice studies where actually he looked at replacing fish meal using a blend of animal protein. And this blend of animal protein was made of 60% poultry byproduct meal, 20% meat and bone meal, 10% feather meal, and 10% blood meal. A very simple mixture. Let's see whether we can replace fish meal with that mixture. And he formulated feed with two different levels of digestible protein, a high level of digestible protein and a lower level. So a high level of protein and lower level of protein. And these are the results, and I like to interpret these results. In a low protein feed, in a lower protein feed, 35% digestible protein, we were able to replace, right, reduce the fish meal level down to 28%, and after that the performance would drop off. In the higher protein feed, we're able to reduce the fish meal level down to 8% in a highly carnivorous marine fish species before performance drop. So that tells me that rendered animal product, that mixture, had slightly less good digestible amino acid content than fish meal. But one of the solutions is just bump up the protein level. By bumping up the protein level, you're pumping up, right, the level of digestible amino acids, of all amino acids, all this, and you're meeting the requirements of the animal. So if you're dealing with, right, low fish meal feed with high level of rendered animal protein, just bump up your protein by 1, 2, 3, 4% point. It's going to be cost effective because these proteins are less expensive than fish meal. So if you increase the protein using fish meal, well, good luck. It's going to cost you a lot of money. But if you're increasing the protein using cheaper ingredients, not going to cost you so much money, and actually allows you to replace more of the fish meal and make more cost-effective feed. So I really like this study, right, carried out by Wang Yan. You can see we reduced fish meal from 40% down to 8%, increased the rendered animal protein mix, right, up to 35%. Basically, in a high protein mix, you could use 28% of the mixture of animal proteins and 8% fish meal, and even you had blood meal in there. So it's over 35% rendered animal protein in there with some soybean meal, some rapeseed meal, and wheat flour, and you had a very highly performing diet out there, showing the value of rendered animal proteins. Wang Yan continued to do the work on rendered animal protein in a wide variety of species. I like this trial here where he substitutes fish meal for poultry byproduct meal. And look at those. So he started reducing fish meal and performance even increased. So actually replacing a bit of fish meal by poultry byproduct meal was beneficial. And then after that, he could use a whole lot of poultry byproduct meal in there, reduce the fish meal level using that poultry byproduct meal. And only at the end, right, when you eliminate the fish meal, the performance dropped to the initial level, all this. So there was too much poultry byproduct meal, not enough fish meal in there. But you can see it could use anywhere between 10%, 9.7% to 38.7% poultry byproduct meal in this, right, Japanese sea bass diet and obtain very good performance of the animal, right? So it's a quadratic function, but basically there's 2 points. There are two diets that perform less well. This diet here, the control, and the fish meal free diet, but the rest are performing equally the same, showing you the potential value of high quality protein ingredients like poultry byproduct meal, all this. Now, feather meal is a nice story, and I talked about it in the digestibility presentation, so you can go and revisit that presentation. And I'll just recap a little bit of some of that. So we developed, so my former students, PhD student Guillaume Feuzy, developed a processing technique to process feather meal to make it more digestible. And you basically use a digestibility assay and a slope ratio assay to assess the bioavailability of amino acids more reliably than you could do on a digestibility basis. So he started with commercial feather meal, a feather meal 1, which is a mixture of feathers and hog hair, and feather meal 2, which was pure feather meal, commercially produced, steam hydrolyzed, things that you can buy, you can get from renderers and ingredient broker. But we treated them with sodium sulfite, a protease, some water, incubated for 24 hours, dry the stuff, reduce into a very fine powder, and use this in feeds, in very special feeds, because they were arginine deficient feed, and we use feather meal or L-arginine, the different feather meal, or synthetic arginine to increase the arginine content of the diet to 1.35 and 1.5% of the diet. So the requirements, the arginine, close to the arginine requirements of rainbow trout. So basically compare the different feather meal source, original versus pre-processed versus L-arginine, in their ability to supply arginine. He measured digestibility using the Guelph system, and he measured that the treatment of the feather meal with the specific treatment increased digestibility by 4 or 5 percentage point. It increased significantly, improved the digestibility of the feather meal. So you can see the feather meal 1 goes from 91.4% digestibility to 94%. The feather meal 2 goes from 90.8 to 94.6. So about 3 or 4 percentage point increase in digestibility of the protein and amino acid. And he carried out a growth trial, slope ratio assay. And in a nutshell, this is the result. Actually, feed intake of the animal fed the pre-processed feather meal went through the roof, especially for feather meal 2, pure feathers that were hydrolyzed. The fish just loved that diet, and they ate a lot of feed, and they actually grew very fast. Improvement in growth performance in all the animals with the pre-treatment, showing that the feather meals were an effective source of arginine, but especially the pre-processed feather meal was an excellent source of arginine. And the proof the pudding is in the eating. We measure arginine intake and arginine retention, and we calculate arginine retention efficiency. And at the best level, we arrive to 70% arginine retention efficiency, which is the maximum theoretical retention efficiency for arginine, because you get maintenance and inevitable catabolism of this arginine. So actually, this product became almost completely digestible. The amino acid became almost completely bioavailable, showing that feather meal is actually a fantastic resource, but it's still, the nutrients are kind of locked up in the protein structure because of cross-linkage of amino acids. And actually, through a simple processing treatment, you can unlock these locked nutrients and make this product fantastic in terms of palatability. These products are as good as any protein hydrolysate that I ever seen, and basically fantastic in supporting the growth of these animals. All this. Now, if you go too high level at 24-25% feather meal, then the performance starts to drop. But at somewhere around 10 to 12%, it's basically the sweet spot at which you can use these feather meal very effectively. The digestibility increased with the pre-processing treatment, but the digestibility doesn't tell you the whole story, because you can see that feather meal 1 was 86% digestible, less than the feather meal 2, but still the feather meal 2 performed better than the feather meal 1. And the feather meal 2 pre-processed performed better than the pre-processed 1. So digestibility is not an indicator, perfect indicators of the bioavailability of amino acids. There seems to be some potential residual effect of residual disulfide bonds and cross-linked amino acid, limiting the bioavailability of nutrients in feather meals, so needs to be addressed. So actually measuring cross-linked amino acids, I believe, is a very important aspect to do quality control of amino acids, quality control of feather meal. Apologies. The last study I want to talk about is a study that was just published very recently in February in 2021, where they look at the skin response to diet formulation. So they look at basically the dermis and the mucus layer in the skin of a Teleos fish species fed 2 different diets. And here's the diet. They're fish meal based diet, 2 kinds of fish meal, fish protein hydrolysate, some squid meals, a lot of marine proteins, but then 3% spray dried plasma protein. So swine plasma protein was used, product called Apetian from American Protein Corporation. Just 3% of this thing in high quality diet with lots of fish meal and fisheries byproduct, high quality ingredient. We're not talking a cheap diet here. A 51.7% protein, 17% fat diet. And I like this infographic or presentation, a summary of the result. That 3% spray dried plasma increase the basically the thickness of the dermis, increase the thickness of the mucus producing cell in the skin, allow slightly better growth, right? Slightly better growth and lower FCR. A 3% use of spray dry this. So that's really quite amazing, really credible things, a lot of work that they carried out. So actually, make me believe that rendered animal protein have a role to play also as functional proteins. Some of them are quite expensive. Spray dried plasma can be quite expensive, but used at low level is as good as any of many of the additives that you're using, that we're using today, and promoting the health. And skin problem are a common issue. I know in salmon, especially during the winter, in marine fish species and crowded thing, the skin is things that right exposed to the environment gets beat up. So actually, there can be more and more research on this, and I think the rendered animal proteins, in some case, may play an important functional role as a supplier of very specific nutrients that may be good for health and skin health and overall health of the animal. So as a conclusion of this presentation, rendered animal proteins are highly digestible and show high nutritive value. I formulated with very high level. I have confidence in these products, can support high growth and feed efficiency as long as you know how to formulate. Of course, you have to play with the fine tuning of feed formulation. Sometimes performance can drop, stuff like that. You have to know how to formulate to properly meet the requirements. You cannot just completely replace the fish meal and assume everything is going to be fine. You have to balance out your feed formulation. And actually, there's opportunity to make even these products even better. In the case of feather meal, simple processing, cost-effective processing could actually unlock a lot of the nutrients and all this. I think there's quite a bit more work in this. And finally, I think there's opportunity for these products to be used as functional ingredients in feed, in plant-based feed, or even animal marine product-based feed. I thank you very much for your attention. I thank the North American Renderers Association, especially the Hong Kong office for their support, Dr. Li Peng, and the Fats and Protein Research Foundation to fund a lot of this work, including, and before that, the Canadian Renderers Association, which no longer exists, but was very dynamic and supportive. A lot of work was done with the support of the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and the Ministry of Natural Resources of Ontario, which supported my lab for decades. NSERC, which is the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council of Canada. Evonik supported a lot of the work on amino acids that we did. Martin Mills was a local feed manufacturer, no longer in business today, but really was helpful in actually helping us formulate and manufacture, especially practical diet. And I mentioned the Canadian rendered industry that got me started in this. I thank you very much. Hopefully you enjoyed this series of seminar. I'm available to answer questions anytime. You send me an email, you send me a message on WhatsApp, etc. The contact info can be available. Thank you very much. Real pleasure to interact with you. Thank you.